Welcome back to the live stream. Let us now look forward to hearing from the panel directors, Crystal and Linda. They're going to lead a round of discussions on the opportunities in the innovation of education. The floor is yours. Good evening and good morning, everyone. My name is Yu Zhenyang. I am from the International Educational Development of Columbia University. Good morning and good evening. My name is Linda. I am at Economics and Political Development for Columbia University, CEPA. Thank you for coming to the Innovative Education panel. Over the recent years, the education evolution had brought a lot of anxiety to parents and students alike, and this has actually led to a lot of explorations for people to think about the original aspiration of education. There had been many black swan incidents, and people have been thinking about how we can change the mode of education so we can adjust to this era of profound change. And within China, the existing education system, the population, resources, and a lot of mindset issues, many people believed that innovative education could not really be universal. But we believe that the promotion of education innovation needs to be built upon a very conducive ecosystem. It needs the joint participation and support of the entire society, in addition to macro policies and environment. So we need to look at the meaning of the current practices and explorations and understand what parents and frontline teachers as well as leaders can do to guarantee a very good environment for students as they pursue their academic career and improve their employment competitiveness. So we'll be talking about these possible opportunities and challenges and look at the path of development for education innovation. Today, we were very honored to have invited to the panel 5 panelists. We have Professor Thomas Hatch from Columbia University. We have Ms. Wendy Hayes, Senior Fellow of Advanced Leadership Initiative at Harvard University. We have the co-founder of Veritas China, Mr. Sun Guanhua, co-founder and CEO of ETU School, Shenhua Zhang, and also Zhang Zhe, Admissions Office of Moonshot Academy, owner-principal of Education Show with teacher Zhang. It's going to be conducted in 2 parts. The first part will be presentations by our panelists. The first panelist to share with us is Mr. Zhang Zhe. He's one of the frontline practitioners for innovation in education in China and has become co-founders of important schools and teaching organizations. He's going to provide us with some unique perspectives. He's now going to talk to us about how innovation is a part of education. Greetings, my name is Zhang Zhe. Thank you, CES, for your invitation so that a frontline practitioner like myself could share with you my understanding of innovation in education. In the past 5 years, I have participated in 2 schools in their efforts to innovate education. And I have had some in-depth communication with these new schools and also maintained a very tight relationship with conventional school systems. I believe innovation is not a correct description of what we are doing. We're not doing anything that's disruptive. Innovative schools are actually doing what the national government is asking us to pursue. We wanted to help the students to build their moral virtues as well as build their capabilities and skill sets. So I'd like to raise 3 questions so we can think about them together. Innovation schools are actually trying to act out these questions, the answers to these questions. In schools, we think about why we have schools. In classrooms, we think about why we teach. In families, we think about why children go to school. And I would like to spend the next few minutes to discuss with you these questions. If we look back in history, innovation education has always played a very important role in the development of productivity and development of humans. And we can see that over the different rounds of industrialization, innovation in education has always been bringing about new progress. As we all know, today's China is experiencing wide and profound social changes. It is also engaging in vast and unique practices in innovation. Are we ready for the new era? Ministry of Education has set up new standards for the compulsory education, and it is surrounding 9 main subjects. And innovation is a keyword that pops up very frequently in every part of the subject core capabilities. People talk about innovation. It doesn't matter which type of school you come from, innovative or conventional, you have to look into this in a very proactive way. So a Shenzhen school or a Beijing school that I've worked with in 2021, after the new policy of lifting the burdens for children, many people around me, parents from children of our school, and also colleagues in our industry have asked me whether the new policy had impacted my operation. Actually, I would like to answer them that we are already doing what the new policy is asking us to do before the policy came out. If you look at it, the policy, it looks like it's reducing the learning hours, but in essence, it is adding hours. The original hours spent on learning and studying is now replaced with more high quality experiences. We look at the qualities and skills the students need to have, and these skills are not the piano lessons you take, the programming lessons you take. This is actually the set of capability and moral strength that you need to have when you go into the real world. And all of this had always been in the curriculum, and it is instilled in every one of the subjects. I'll take mathematics as an example. Abstract thinking, modeling, imagination, mathematical calculation, analysis, and logic. All of these are the basic skills that are required for students who take mathematics. This is actually are talking about the capabilities a student need to have, such as problem solving. So this actually reminds me, in our school, the Moonshot Academy, there has been a homework. Can we play frisbee on the balcony? It actually looks like something that has nothing to do with math. We were recently moved into a new campus. On the roof, actually, we have a playground. Frisbee is a favorite game of our students. And some people believe the fences are not enough, and some people believe this is actually doable. And so this was a question that was in the homework. When the students do the homework, a real life question is different to a textbook question. There is no correct answer whatsoever. So the students would have to distill the mathematical elements outside from this question, and they have to build a mathematical model. Some frisbees might fly vertically, some might fly in a hyperbole. So these would be the different elements and possibilities that would act as variables in the calculation. Some students looked up in literature, and this paper was actually focusing on the trajectory of frisbees. So as they look at these literature, they had been sharing their understanding and exploration. And by that stage, the question itself is no longer important. The important thing is how they have learned to solve a real life problem. They have learned abstraction, they've learned building a model, they have actually learned how to think using mathematical logic. And so as we evaluate their skills, this can be something that's very simple and standardized, but how do we evaluate students' capability to think? In the past, we don't have good standards. So a lot of our examinations were focused on the points. And so students must focus on how to get the points. But now, and as I look at these innovation schools, frontline educators have been doing a lot of practice, and the evaluation and assessment had shifted from these score points to how good the skill sets are for the students. So naturally, we would be able to foster a well-rounded talent for the future era. So at this stage, I thought about another an analogy we have at Moonshot. In the past, we look at the traditional assessment. It's like buying a little pig at the market. You just need to weigh it and pay the money. So in the end, you have fat pigs in the market because the more they weigh, the more money they fetch. But now we would look at how healthy they are. We look at the skin pigment of the pig. We look at their body fat level and so on and so forth. So now we actually have to change how we raise pigs. The pandemic is another change. If we can satisfy the school's assessment just by doing online classes, do we ever need to return to school? What is the most important thing that the school has online classes can't offer? Assessments are different, nature of classes had been different, and we have now seen the focus shifting from class-oriented and teacher-oriented to student-oriented. Of course, this has to be supported by the culture of the school, and this has to be something that is shared across different generations of teachers. Young teachers would have to bring in new ideas, and older teachers, more mature and senior teachers, must be supportive enough and accepting enough so that they can work together to create something that is more suited to today's student. I want to also emphasize that the lifting of student burden does not mean the students should now stop learning and stop trying, because the subjects are still there. And there are more and more subjects, more and more challenging subjects. So we need to look at the quality of the students, but to give them these qualities is not something that you can do overnight. It needs a long time, and it needs the joint effort of schools, teachers, and parents. So we need to create a very intimate, safe, and healthy environment for the students so they can come and be rest assured that they are surrounded by love and consideration, and we are indeed understanding the policy, the goal and aim of the policy. Innovation schools are more like a catfish. It is in the market, it's stirring up the mud, and frontline teachers and educators are actually athletes at the Olympic Games. Young educators in China have already become participants of global innovation in education. And I believe this is a demonstration of our cultural confidence and also a new beginning for China to connect with the rest of the world. And finally, I would like to say to our colleagues in the education industry, we are not alone. More and more people are joining us. More and more people are practicing and exploring innovation in education, and it is boundless. Everyone plays a relay in this part. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Zhang Zhe, for that. There has been a lot of profound insight from his presentation. And now we'll give the floor to Professor Thomas Hatch to talk to us about how we can provide a human-centric or student-centric environment for the students. He is a professor at the School of Education at Columbia University and has very deep insights on the schools in developed and developing countries. In 2021, he's published a book regarding what sort of education we need for an unforeseeable future. The floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you so much, Linda and Crystal and all of my fellow panelists here. I'm really delighted to be able to join with you today to talk about these critical issues. And I'm going to pick up on many of the issues that were raised in the first inspiring talk, but focusing particularly on the system level. How do we create a system that is capable of supporting human-centered education? And this work draws on studies that I've been doing over the past number of years that have looked at comparisons of what it takes to create more human-centered and powerful learning in both higher and lower performing education systems. So if you could move to the next slide. And then let's move to the next one as well. What I really want to highlight from all of this work, and I've been studying the successes and often the challenges and failures of large-scale school reform in the US and around the world for about 30 years, is that over and over again, we see, whether it's in China or the United States or other parts of the world, even though the world is changing, often relatively rapidly, many aspects of schools and school systems are not. And another critical, I think, factor that we have to identify is that even our higher performing, quote unquote, higher performing education systems, according to PISA or other international tests, they're struggling just as much to change their systems and to make them more supportive of students' well-being. So in fact, you see systems like Finland and Singapore, which are struggling with the level of academic pressure, in particular in Singapore, and trying to make those systems more human-centered and shift education in the directions that our first speaker was highlighting. Next slide. And as you see that Singapore has some of the same tutoring and academic pressure issues that China has as well. So I've tried to summarize a number of the lessons that I've learned from these studies in this book that Linda mentioned, The Education We Need for a Future We Can't Predict. And it really addresses two critical questions. First of all, what have we learned about why it's so hard to change schools? But then how do we use that knowledge about why schools often haven't changed in order to help us think about what we can do to create this more powerful human-centered education at scale in the future? And the first lesson is really to highlight that even though it often looks like schools are not changing, there are many ways in which schools have changed, but they've changed slowly and they've changed incrementally over long periods of time. So if we look at systems like Finland and Singapore, which are recognized as high-performing systems now, over a period of 30 or 40 years, it took to create those systems. So we have to take that 30 to 40-year perspective on developing the education systems we want and need. But the other critical piece is that one of the reasons that it takes so long to make these changes is that improvement initiatives are most likely to take off when their goals, their capacity demands, and their values fit the common needs, existing capabilities, and prevailing conditions. That means some improvements are more likely to take off than others. The challenge, of course, is that that means that those more radical reforms, those things that really dramatically change the system or might disrupt it, those are less likely to spread on a large scale. So what can we do about this, especially for those of us who really want to see fairly dramatic changes in the system? Well, from my perspective, we can recognize there are places, what I call niches of possibility, where the conditions are more amenable for changing schools and that can create a foundation for transforming schooling in the future. And we just heard wonderful examples about what's happening at Moonshot that can help us imagine the kinds of changes that we could see across a system over some period of time. But as I say, niches of possibility, there are places within and outside schools where the conditions and affordances support more powerful learning, places like E2, High Tech High in the States, Moonshot, but also museums, after-school programs, maker spaces, science labs, places both in and out of school where we can really develop the practices and resources and assessments, as we heard in the first talk, that can help to move us forward. To me, the lesson here is that rather than trying to scale up a best practice across the entire system, across all subjects, all grades, that kind of thing, we really need to focus on creating the conditions that are going to support more powerful and holistic learning in more and more places in and out of school. Focus on creating more moonshots, more E2s, more science labs, more maker spaces. That's a critical focus. One of the barriers to creating more and more of these niches of possibility is the fact that we've treated education as if it's synonymous with schooling and focused almost exclusively on preparing students for college, and in China for the Gaokao. And that's why I agree that a critical piece of all of this is that we have to come together and rethink the focus of education. If you can go to the next slide. We really need to rethink this equalization of schooling and education and recognize that education has to embrace all the opportunities to support the development of the whole child for the whole day, for their whole lives. And that's why I argue in the book that on the one hand, we need to be making the schools we have more efficient, more effective, and more equitable right now, even if that's just, these incremental changes over time. But at the same time, we have to be working together, parents, students, policymakers, researchers, academics, to develop the common understanding and collective responsibility that are going to really fuel the social movements that will transform our society and education in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Thomas. 谢谢 Professor Thomas 对回归本质的教育体系。
Thank you, Professor Thomas, for the wonderful sharing. Our next speaker is Ms. Wendy Hayes, and she is a senior fellow of ALI at Harvard University, and she used to be a partner at Deloitte, also the mother of 2 children, and she's the member, a board member in many tech companies around the world. And let's welcome Ms. Wendy Hayes, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm very honored to be here. Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Crystal, and everybody else to make this happen. My background is business, but I have tremendous respect for educator and education. My father was a teacher. I grew up on school campus. So today, since the topic is about innovation, so I want to share some of my thoughts on whether there are 2 questions: whether the knowledge-based education is sufficient. The second is, how can society, including business and social leaders, can help with competency learning. Now, I got back from China a couple of weeks ago. When I talked to parents there, what I heard the most is, I just want my kids to be happy and healthy. Knowing the Chinese parents, and me being one of them, this is probably on top of, we want kids to be competent and competitive and getting good college and get good job. Okay. Now, the fierce Gaokao forced kids to focus on rote learning, test scores. And now the recent policy change, 双减, in China put spotlight on non-academics. But the question is, aside from academics, what else is really important? What are the non-academics we want to focus on for the kids' overall well-being? Now, just this past week, I wrote some recommendation letters for my students who apply schools, universities like Harvard and MIT and Stanford. Surprisingly, not surprisingly, the common theme when I doing the questions, they're all asked about competencies of that individual, that candidate. Now, I deliberately not using skills, I use competency because it's a, 核心竞争力, it's a quality of the person, right? Which include knowledge, which includes skills, which include attitude, the mindset. And I thought the third one is extremely important, which we don't emphasize enough. Right? Now, this the same competencies apply to all aspects of our lives, apply to all of us, not just students, not just young people, apply to business professionals, apply to work and at home. Even my personal experience, and I'm still working on my own competencies throughout my life. I will continue to do so. Now, since we're talking about the competencies, my last couple of years at Harvard, and also based on my own 25 plus years of business experience, so I summarized the 4 levels of competencies. We don't have time to go into details of each individual ones, but the 4 levels, one is cognitive. The second is really relationship with yourself. I had dinner with a spiritual leader last night, and we spent 4 hours talking about actually this particular topic, the relationship with yourself, which I think is extremely important. Also relationship with others. Now, of course, the overarching one is global competencies, how we develop that global competencies, instill that quality in our young people, which is extremely, extremely important. Now, one thing I want to mention is the knowledge being part of that competency. Knowledge, of course, is important. Traditional education has a focus on knowledge for decades, centuries. So I think it is important. And again, the Gaokao is not going away, and how we're going to work with the system, and on top of that, and build skills and develop those mindset and attitude. So for the whole, the competitiveness. Okay. Now, so again, there's the same competency applied to all aspects of our lives. I've talked about it. The next slide. Now, the reality is, based on my business experience, we've seen this often in the workplace when we hire people, right? And we see a lot of college graduates, really, they're poorly prepared. Not just our elementary and middle school students. Some college graduate, they're poorly prepared. Their lack of necessary skills and necessary competencies in order to be successful in the workplace. Now, we do see this disconnect between traditional education and societal demands. Now, this problem is not unique in China. It's universal. I do think current traditional education does not put enough emphasis on this type of training, the whole competency training. For various reasons, I think it could be because kids are already overwhelmed with academic pressure, or the teachers just don't have enough capacity or support to teach this kind of training competencies. And possibly because there's no measurement for competency learning. I think previous Zhang Zhe Laoshi mentioned that, right? So rather than waiting for schools or school systems to change, which is very hard, I've been wondering from my fellowship research and whether and how we individuals in the society can help. And I do think education is responsible of all of us in society, especially for business and social leaders, because I do think for us, we've from our work and life experience, we understand what kind of competence is important. Now, if you use a future back approach, right, we know what's going to happen in the future. What are the necessary skills, competencies in order for young people to succeed? Then we work backwards, right, future back approach. and how we can help. Now, I know my time is up soon, so there are a couple of things I want to mention. One is the demand side, which is students and teachers and parents, they need a guidance as far as what are the important competencies. And on the supply side and business, as I travel around the globe, as I talk to people, talk to different leaders, and we've had our shares of success and failures, and we understand the importance of competencies, and also we're willing and eager to help. So these two sides at this point and are not connected yet. So I hope in the future the demand side and supply side will be connected to some degree. Now, in what format? We definitely that's a topic of for later discussion. But I think that's something worth thinking about, how we connect those two resources. Now, as part of my research, in the topic of innovation, so we need to build a coalition among business and social leaders, coalition between school and society, and connect those resources, right? Life coaching between our students and leaders, and also promote awareness of competency learning. Okay. Now, final thought, and I do think the competitiveness of society really depends on how well we integrate the education in society. So with that, I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Wendy. 谢谢 Wendy 的分享。相信各位听了 Wendy 的分享，也
Thank you, Wendy, for the sharing of such wonderful insights. I am sure that inspired a lot of thinking on your mind as well. Our next speaker is Sun Guanghua, the co-founder of Veritas China. He is now a PhD candidate at Michigan University, and he graduated from New York University in his undergraduate studies. His organization, Veritas China, is the first ever liberal arts education students organization, and today he's going to share with us some of their experience as they promote liberal arts education in China. The floor is yours, please. Great, thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Linda. Thank you for the invitation to speak at today's panel. My name is Sun Guanghua, and I'm the co-founder of Veritas China. I would like to take a few minutes to introduce our organization, and the other points of views will be shared with you with the roundtable. Veritas China is a liberal arts education promotion student body, different to many other similar organizations. We were founded in 2015, and it was of the student, by the student, and for the student. All of our activities are surrounded, are student-oriented, and we have had more than 10,000 online, offline classes. Tens of thousands of high school students and university students have participated in our programs. Because of our affordable prices and also scholarship setup, students were able to come from all corners of the country to come and join our program. This is a photo from last summer. Since the beginning of the pandemic, our programs have become smaller in scale, and these two photos come from the workshops we held in Shanghai, and we hope Shanghai's pandemic would go under control very quickly. And in 2021, we started to provide education bulletins and a blog. We have tens of thousands of people who pay attention to education, getting information from these blogs. And as a student organization, we have been joining in the education of our peers. And I believe that in itself is innovation. And afterwards, as we engage in roundtable discussions, I would like to share with you more ideas. So this is a photo of our 50 student council members. Majority of them are undergraduate, postgraduate, and PhD students in different schools around the world. Most of them are doing this work in their spare time. I would like to thank them very much taking this opportunity. So this will be all that I would like to share at this stage. Well, thank you very much, Guanghua. We can feel your passion and persistence with the promotion of liberal arts education in China. Next, we would like to give the floor to Shenhua Zhang, the founder of E2 School. He had founded the E2 school with Li Yinguo, and he is someone who is a serial entrepreneur and father to 3 children. He's going to share with us their principle and philosophy. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. I would like to take this opportunity to share with you some of our guiding principles and some of our thinking for the foundation of education. I can't see the next page. So E2 Education was founded in 2016. What we wanted to do is to go back to the original aspiration of education, bringing people happiness. What we wanted to do is to create a K-12 school that is small and beautiful. You can see on the left side of the PowerPoint slide, my 3 children. In 2016, my oldest goes into primary school in year 1. So 6 years later, the school had gone through a period of very difficult development, and now we have our own campus in Beijing, which is the right-hand side photo. It is a very small campus that can house 300 students, and in Guangzhou we have another campus that can house 100 students. What we wanted to do is to create something that is small and beautiful, because we have a small student body, because with the context of mainstream education in China, our target group is very small. It's very much a niche group. And we wanted to provide education based on wonderful interpersonal relationships. And we wanted to build a community where people can live a joyous life together. What is the context or external environment we're facing? It's been a few very unusual years. In China, economy has been growing really quickly. Over the past 10 years, the GDP had grown by more than 100%, but there had been a lot of problems such as rich and poor gap, as well as other potential conflicts. And we're also facing very ferocious competition between Eastern and Western civilizations. Whether or not it'll be competition or cooperation between the 2 cultures brings a lot of uncertainty to the future. It has also been a few years where artificial intelligence developed really quickly. In the next 20 to 30 years, a huge number of jobs would disappear. So many parents had become very anxious. They don't know what the future holds, and they don't know what kind of education could prepare their children for such a future. On the right-hand side, you can see it is from a report of the United Nations. The sense of happiness over the past 10 years has not really increased significantly in China. And the final graph was a rapid drop in population. And there has been a 40% drop in number of newborns over the past 2 years. So this again will bring a huge impact to the education sector in China. So we want to answer a question that is fundamental. What is the ultimate goal of education? We believe that E2's mission statement is to create a generation of happy Chinese, and we believe that is what we want to do. A famous former Soviet Union educator had said that the most important for students is their happiness, and an ideal education is to create real people who are able to spend their life in happiness. And this is something that is eternal and it is the ultimate value of education. If we can't do that, if we can't free ourselves from the education where people have to compete with each other, and those people who are not strong enough or do well enough will drop off the bridge, then we can never gain happiness. Before we created E2, we had proposed the idea of an inverted world. Everyone, we believe, should have a mindset. And in the past, we pay attention to knowledge and skill, and then methodology followed by mindset. When you have a mindset, you will be able to make wise decisions when you're faced with choices in life. But these are all very superficial. These are things that can bring us the conventional success. But then under that, we have values, and again under that we have self-awareness. All of these things are actually bringing meaning and happiness to us. So traditional education are teaching us things that can eventually be replaced by machines, but the bottom two layers, the more creative, the more complex, the more important are actually the questions that need to be answered by effective education. What do we want to do then? We hope that we can have to build an operation system for children when they're very young. So we wanted to make them happy, optimistic actionists, and for them to become very effective learners. In other words, we want to make them realists who never loses hope in hardship. So we wanted to build a model. Our core competence is in the shape of a conch. I'll talk about the shape of conch next, but I want to talk about the green ecosystem for education first. One tree represents one human being. It grows from a tiny little blossom, a bud, to a big tree. So it is divided in different stages, with kindergarten year 1 to 5, year 6 to 8, year 9 to 12. In the different years of education, we have 3 tiers that we need to achieve. We have the core competence, and the leaves represent the conventional education, which focuses on knowledge and skill. And in the middle, the trunk represents the construction of the mindset. So these 3 parts need to really grow in a balanced manner. If we have less leaves, they won't have enough nutrition, and if they don't have strong enough trunks and root systems, the tree would not enjoy good health and a level of certainty. And so what we want to do as educators is education that follows the natural the laws of nature, and we don't want to make them grow up too fast. And this is the core competence model. I think that page is missing for some reason. So I was talking about how a good type of education is something that follows the law of the nature. It would start slow and then become faster. You can look at the dotted line, the leftmost chart. Everyone would have a rule or pattern or curve that symbolizes the best way for this person to grow up. So the best education allows children to develop along that dotted line. If we try to make them grow too fast, it would move in the green curve. So when they're really young, they learn really fast, but as they grow up, they dislike learning, and more severely, they would become students who hate learning in the middle. And so in E2, what we want to do is for them to follow that natural pattern of development and growth. So we want them to become someone who is really rich in their hearts. So Education following the role of nature meant we need to actually pay equal attention to social emotion as well as in their academic achievement. At the left-hand side, we have the Maslow pyramid of demands that goes from physical and biological needs to self-realization. And on the right-hand side, we believe at E2 that we need to pay attention to their social emotional skills as well as their academic learning. At the very bottom, there needs to be good relationships. Good interpersonal relationships bring us a sense of security. Once you have the sense of security, the child would demonstrate very good conditions. So with that condition, they'll have motivation and passion for things. So in E2, we often see that when children came in, they were at different stages and they would have different sort of conditions. We can't really ask them to jump into a condition where we focus only on their score sheets. We must help them to adjust their conditions. For different reasons, they might be in fear, they might be very nervous. So we'll try to help them to adjust that condition, and then we'll try to adjust the behavior of learning. So we wanted to actually help them to improve rather than threaten them with failure if they can't do well enough. And so in our way of education, every student will be able to develop and grow both internally and externally. So coming back to education and what is the most important thing about education, we believe the most important thing is to have a focused target on education. And secondly, we need to have an empowering environment. So we have raised a classroom that's student-centric, a school that is teacher-centric, and a community that is school-centric. And so at the bottom layer, we need to have an environment that supports our students. So there needs to be organizational innovation. A good organization should be one that enables, it should be one that has a good magnetic field. Everyone within that field need to have good conditions. Thank you very much for listening. All right, thank you, Hua Zhang, and all the rest of our speakers. We'll now go into a 40-minute roundtable discussion, and you can leave your questions in the chat box. And some of the commonly asked questions will be filtered out and will then bring it to the attention of our panelists.
So Professor Tom, you mentioned about niches of possibility during your presentation, but many of them are occurring in private schools and after-school programs. So are there any possibilities within the Chinese public educational system, and what conditions are needed for those innovations to happen and develop in the long run?
Thank you, Crystal. That's an excellent and difficult question. But I think it really goes to the point that I was making, where we really need to rethink the separation between schools and other opportunities for learning. So from my perspective, seeing what's happening in private schools or in after schools, or what Veritas is doing in summer programs, they're really important for showing us what is possible. Now, it may not be easy to suddenly scale those programs up across the public system. But the most important thing we can do first and foremost is to take a long-term perspective and to recognize that the inspiration and the possibility that these programs are creating now can become a part of the system overall if we think about 20, 30, 40-year perspective. This is the kind of a strategic long-term approach that a system like Singapore is taking. It's also exactly the kind of approach that the United States never takes, who always wants that instant, disruptive innovation that's suddenly going to change the system. But we have to understand that all of our systems, whether it's in China or somewhere else, creates these constraints that make it difficult for those quick changes to take place. And so I've spent a lot of time in Norway, and one of the things, the key sayings they have in Norway, don't fight the snow, right? If you're in Norway, it's going to snow. Don't pretend it's not going to snow. Don't complain about it. Learn how to ski and win all the medals at the Winter Olympics, right? Take advantage of the conditions that allow you to make those improvements and then do it over a long period of time. In the same way, within the public system in China and elsewhere, we can look to some of the aspects of the examples that were shared today, whether it's from Veritas or the really interesting example of the Frisbees from Moonshot. Those very specific developments, what I might call micro innovations, can often find their way into the current system. And over a period of 10 or more years, they can begin to grow in ways that really establish the conditions for changing that ecosystem, as the last speaker was saying, and create the conditions for change across the public system.
Thank you so much, Professor Tom. 冠华这边有什么想要分享的吗？
教授，光华 do you have anything to share? Well, Professor Hatch talked a lot about possibilities. I think we need to first come to terms with the fact that the public schools in China are predominant. And public schools, especially in the past 10 years, already produced a lot of successes. For example, Shiyi school, and that is why public schools are still going to stay. And as Professor said, there are unlimited possibilities in this public education system, but we need to take a long-term vision and look at what they may become in the next 20 or 30 years. We need to project into the future, considering what technologies can do and what changes technologies can bring. Well, in public schools, maybe the system for selecting classes would become completely different. And we will have better record keeping system on it in the future. And the system is going to be more individualized. For instance, what approach is adopted by which student and what result does it yield, and these records will help us progress instead of repeating our past mistakes. Thank you very much. Indeed, a lot of public schools are on making a lot of endeavors on innovation in the past few years. Any other sharings from our panelists? Wendy? Zhang Zhe, I see you raised your hand. It just so happens that 2 days ago, Ministry of Education of the PRC published a document called Strengthening a Faculty Plan in the New Era, which focuses on teacher education and training reforms. I often look at such changes by comparing the current status with the past. Modern education in China only has a history about 30 or 50 years. We've made a lot of breakthroughs already. However, it is still growing and developing at a rapid speed. I am very optimistic about what will happen in the future. Take public schools, for instance, and there are a lot of outstanding teachers and men and leaders. They are actually building their own workshops, and their influences are increasing. and they are actually forming organizations similar to E2. And I think that's one of the changes that I've observed that I would like to share with you. Thank you very much. Speaking of Moonshot and E2, as a question to Mr. Zhang Zhe and Mr. Shin, well, because both of you have a lot of experience of frontline education in China. We've heard and said that there are a lot of innovation schools in China that are private. That's why tuitions tend to be high. Most of the students are middle or upper class. Shi and affiliated school of Peking University are outstanding schools undoubtedly, but the students enrolled are already very excellent. So they want to know how you look at inclusive education or education for all in this context. Well, I can answer your question from several different perspectives. The first, mechanisms of private and public schools are different, and they have different strength. I think private schools are good complementary to public ones. Private schools bear all costs on their own. And for instance, rentals, there are large parts of the costs on on the other hand, public schools receive all the funding from the government. The model said that private schools are experimenting come with costs, and once these models are proven successful, maybe the costs can be reduced in the future. Also, I think the hardest challenge is not about money, but awareness and recognition. There are very few people that recognize that the experimental models that we are bringing about. Whether public or private, innovative schools themselves exist because they create values. And as long as their values are recognized, more and more people can change their mindset only when more people acknowledge innovative education can it be accepted. Well, innovation in the field of education can be very expensive, and cost of education differs in different industries and sectors, and innovation is always brought about by the brightest minds. We see a lot of efforts in rural schools. While innovation is important, definitely these places. And I'm afraid there are fundamental problems that cannot be resolved by innovation, but we try to avoid zero-sum games with innovation. And I agree very much with what Mr. Shin said about, and the innovation made by private schools and the huge costs these schools are bearing, and also there are sunken costs as well. And on that front, I also want to emphasize that private schools in China actually will become more and more geared towards a not-for-profit, even though now tuitions seem high, but for schools themselves, they are not-for-profit. That is the foundation for schools to guarantee equity and equality. I also learned that there are small and micro-sized schools, for instance, the Moonshot Basing Community, which leaves part of the tuitions to support students that are financially constrained. And if you get an offer from a Moonshot, but you don't have the financial means to attend the school, we can actually provide a support to that. We don't want the students to miss out education opportunities because of financial reasons. Also, we see lots of innovative schools today are working on teacher training quite a lot. They're not very vocal about it, And most of these trainings are done internally. Maybe in the future, they will provide such trainings at larger scales. For instance, Moonshot is also collaborating with public schools, and I hope in the future more trainings of such can benefit people at larger scales. But the challenge is with the existing normal universities and teacher training colleges in China. These teachers are probably not ready for innovation. And that means innovation on teacher training is definitely crucial to the entire ecosystem of education, because this should be done not only on students, but also on teachers. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Zhang Zhe. And Mr. Sun, do you have anything to add? Can I clarify with you? So your question is about at the current stage, and we just talk about how innovative schools actually promote inclusivity or education for all. But you want to know how education organizations help promote inclusivity of education or education for all. But you can also talk about liberal arts education. For instance, your take on the universality of liberal arts education. Understood. Well, can I first answer on to what Mr. Zhang and Mr. Shen just said? Well, we are a student organization. What we focus on is on summer and winter programs which feature curriculum, and we want to increase affordability first of all.
If you wanted to improve equity, a very important thing is that our activities are mostly provided at the minimum possible fee. And when we have that income from the fees, we will take out a large portion, if I remember correctly, 20% to use as scholarship for future participants. This is very important because we improve the accessibility. And then when you're preparing your events, you are actually facing students from very different backgrounds. So you need to be very flexible to accommodate that diversity. And as we provide the courses, we would think about a very key indicator, which is English language proficiency. For students coming from major cities, it doesn't matter if they're from public schools or international schools, their English levels are pretty adequate. And for students who've come from inland cities and more remote areas, their English language proficiency would not be as good. So when you are facing a group student body that is so diverse, we must prepare courses that would accommodate that. And we don't want English language proficiency to become an obstacle for students to learn. So accessibility is one of the key considerations we think about. And in addition to ourselves, there are also other organizations in China that are focusing on education equity. For example, we have migrant workers' children. Their right to education is not guaranteed. But in China, we have the Daffodil School, which is focusing on providing education to children of migrant workers. And so these organizations are making direct efforts towards improving education equity. And I believe that is also a very important part to innovation of education. And they're not alone. There are other private organizations and civic organizations. For example, in Guangdong, we have Ouyang Yanqing. We founded a school, and that's doing the same thing. And in Beijing, there are also several other schools that are providing education to migrant workers' children. Well, thank you very much for sharing with us that information. We know in China, the conventional education still focuses on students' capabilities of achieving high scores in examinations. Majority of the students would have to sit the university entrance exam and the postgraduate student exam. So what can schools or especially teachers and parents do to help improve the environment for students to develop? Mr. Zhang Zhe had talked about teacher training before, very important, and perhaps Wendy, you was about what parents and leaders can do.
I think there are two things. One is to get to college, right? In China, the reality is you have to take a Gaokao. That you have to work with that. It's here to stay. It's not going to change in the short term. So the students do have to work on their academics. So that's the reality. Now, on top of that, now the second part is about the competitiveness, the competencies of the quality of this individual young student. So that's top of academic requirement. Now, my focus is more on this overall well-being, the overall quality of this young individuals. The few things I'm thinking about is, first, of course, is how do we support teachers actually at school? Most of students are in public school system. The family cannot afford to go to private school. The number of students in public schools are overwhelmingly a lot more than private school kids. So how do we work with the system, current system, and give teachers enough support for training? Right? We mentioned that, enough training, so the teachers have the awareness. So when they interacted with students and they are aware of what are the competencies, what are the qualities, and necessary for success in the future. That's something I think we need to train teachers. And also don't forget about parents. Right? The parents need to be trained as well. I'm sure parents, and really, I want to know, I often get this question, what do we need to do, right? What does my kid need to do to get to good college, to get to get a good job? And I think the basic is all of us adults, like teachers and parents and all of us need to learn what are the qualities that are needed. I think that training need to happen at the adult level first. So a few other things you're talking about, since we're talking about getting into college, right? And just last week I mentioned I wrote some recommendation letters. As I look at the questionnaires, a few things pop out and like to share with the audience. The first is I thought students, when they apply school, really have to write their own stories. The stories have to be their own. Oftentimes, I know when you look at the story, it's not quite convincing, right? Whether that story is theirs. It's obvious when the story is there, the students are not. So I think this is first and foremost, the stories have to be the students, have to be from their heart, right? The second is the focus is not on quantity, it's more on quality or duration, right? Because I've seen a lot of students have a lot of activities, especially Chinese students have a lot of activities, a lot of awards, right, in their resume, in their CV. But it's really, if you look at the quality and look at the duration, how long they've done that, right? That's something a bit lacking, right? And another thing I would say is write your struggle, your heart story. It's your experience. I've seen a lot of success stories, but if I see an essay, it's about struggle, it's about a failure, and I will read it very carefully and what that student has learned from that experience. So I think those are the thoughts I want to share with the audience.
Okay, thank you so much, Wendy.
Yeah.
And Professor Tom, do you have any suggestion for the Chinese parents and educators to foster students' well-being and educational innovation progress in China?
Well, I think building on what Wendy said, you're not alone. That's the first thing to recognize and to reach out to others, to talk and to share your struggles, your concerns. And I think, E2 again provides an example. As Wendy was saying, parents need to learn and educate themselves about the system and what works. And E2 has explicitly made parent education a part of their work. And parents, can do that on their own, working together to try to understand the challenges and opportunities for their students, and to recognize first and foremost that more academic learning does not necessarily lead to better academic learning, and that in fact a balance that where you're focused on academic tasks that are cognitively challenging and that actually support learning can be carried out. And at the same time, students need opportunities to pursue their own passions and their interests. So it's important to reach out to other parents to understand. It's important to reach out to educators and teachers to support them if they are making some of those changes in their practice, to try to create space to support well-being. Teachers need parents' support to do that. That builds the demand side. And then third, I think building a little bit on the Veritas model is they need to listen to their students and their children and understand what their needs and concerns are. And if we build support for them, particularly in the early grades, as we're talking about at E2 and other places, as they move through the system, they can begin to create the understanding and share ideas about the kinds of support that they need. They can become advocates for themselves. So in that sense, you have teachers, you have parents, you have students who are working together to advocate for the kind of education they need.
Thank you, Professor Tom. And are there any other panelists wanting to share? 张哲老师、华章老师有任何想要分享的
Mr.
吗？
Zhang Zhe, Mr. Hua Zhang, anything else to add? Can I say a few things? Over the past few years, the biggest achievement or gain by E2 is the importance of the philosophy for education and environment. We believe education is in essence an organization development issue. An organization would be evolving and there needs to be an alignment of goals. So we must educate the parents because our parents must have aligned goals with our school. We need to be on the same page, basically. And the school is an organization, but also we are a group of people that share the same principle, and everyone in the organization would influence each other. And so we want everyone to be on the same page, to be part of the organization, and the condition of the organization will in turn impact on people's conditions. We have a E2 village community, which is for parents, and we see similar things. In an online community, you can see the mutual influence of people on each other. So what I would like to say is, in a school, as we're facing the future and growing ourselves, the organization and the members of the organization will influence each other, and this is the prerequisite for a healthy future and healthy organization. Mr. Zhang Zhe had raised your hand. Is there something you would like to say? I fully agree with what has been shared by other panelists. Families, organizations, schools, they're the same. I've observed a very interesting point. Many schools actually are becoming better and better. And in that process, I try to observe them and find out the key to their success. And often I find that their pedagogy didn't change, or they were not really that innovative, but in many occasions, they have been changing relationships, the relationship between teachers and children, and the relationship between the administrators of the school and the teachers. And those changes in relationships have promoted the change of relationship in families between children and parents. In every sector, in every relationship, if the relationship becomes better, then it creates a conducive effect on the children as they grow up. And so if there is something that we can do immediately, we don't have to care about what's happening in the outside world, then it would be this: for the parents to improve the relationship between themselves and their children, and in schools for teachers to proactively improve relationship with the children. Many children would hate some of the subjects, and sometimes the reason is they don't like the teachers. But when you have a good relationship, they would be happier and more willing to learn. And if you have that as your motivation, then innovation would become a natural outcome. And that's an important thing I'd like to share today. Right, thank you very much for that. And we can actually see there are many other questions in the live stream portals, and we would like to select some of their questions. There is a similar question along the lines of what Mr. Zhang had talked about. Innovation in education, how will it change the roles played by students? Do we have any panelists who would like to answer the question, Professor?
Well, I would just start by saying I think that is one of the real possibilities for change, is giving students, supporting the development of their agency and creating more choices that allows them to chart their pathway. It may still end up with, Gaokao, but it may also allow them opportunities for pursuing particular interests. There may be ways to create educational pathways leading to careers or jobs or artistic development. And the more that we empower students and help them develop their voice and listen to their concerns and create opportunities within our system for them to navigate, I think that's a real hope for the future, as opposed to all of us collectively making decisions about what we think might be best.
Thank you, Professor Tom. And Wendy, I saw you nodding your head. So do you have anything to share?
Right. I want to comment on the role of teachers and students. I think is one of the most important relationships between teacher and student. And I think most overwhelmed, I would say, in their own capacity, current capacity now. So I think that's one thing we need to think about. How do we support the teachers and give them the tools so when they interact with students and they're better equipped, especially for things outside academics. I'm sure teachers are very good at teaching academics, but for the things we're talking about, the competencies, the quality of the future leaders, and we need to give our teachers tools, so the teachers know how to, when they interact with students, and they understand those, and they're aware of those tools, and potentially could share with the parents as well. So we need to look at different stakeholders in education, which includes school system, schools, parents, teachers, students. Don't forget about students. They're important. They're probably the most important stakeholder in this. As the professor had said, we can't make the decision out. We adults, we think we know the best, right, for them. But in this case, I think we do need to think about what the youngsters, the young people, and they're the most important stakeholder there. So so the role between teacher and the students, I think, again, how do we give teachers tools? How do we train them? Without creating a separate additional curriculum adding to their already limited capacity. So that's something we need to think about.
Thank you, Wendy. 那我们这边观众也有对博雅素质教育
We
非常感兴趣的。
see
那
on
这边就问一
audience
个
that are
问题，
very
有人
interested
会
in
觉
liberal
得博
arts
雅教育
education.
是
So
文
another
科教育，
question.
更
And
想
some
了解
say
博雅
liberal
教育
arts
的定义是
education
什
is
么？怎
purely
样培
on the
养
arts
学生，
side. What is the definition
包
of
括
liberal
未来
arts
他们
education?
的职
How
业。
do
So
we
a lot of people
train students in the future careers?
So what's a more accurate definition of liberal arts, and how do they prepare students for their future professional career? 焕华有什么想要分享的吗？
Wenhua, would you like to take the question? Yeah, sure. Lots of people see liberal arts as humanities indeed. I think the answer is not difficult to answer. First of all, is liberal arts entirely humanities? Well, in China, we have this division between humanities and natural sciences. There are many definitions of liberal arts. One of them is that liberal arts is on a people-centric education in nature. Liberal arts education focuses on critical thinking skills, on it is the education that teaches people how to look at the world around us with a critical mind. When we think about a issue, for instance, COVID in China, if liberal arts education is all about critical thinking on issues such as COVID-19, and give it purely humanities or purely science, neither is enough. I don't want anything to be subject-based. You need humanities to teach you on compassion and empathy so that you understand the positions that others are in. You also need a science-based knowledge in order to understand what needs to be done to combat situations such as COVID. So I believe liberal arts education itself is a complex. And that cannot be defined as either purely humanities or purely science. The second question, I'm sorry, I think I forgot your second question. Well, and it's the career meaning of liberal arts education. Well, okay, I think we previously discussed on about that. Some say liberal arts education may lead to difficulties in landing on jobs after graduation, and that is related to a common concern about liberal about humanities students having difficulties at finding jobs. Well, because they're always thinking about well-paid jobs in high tech and finance industries. That's how they jobs, but there are a lot of types of jobs as a humanities student. Well, you may be more suitable to media professions such as a journalist, human resources, compared to a math or science major student. So that is definitely a misconception. Liberal arts also really focuses on reading and writing competencies. Many people always think these skills are not important in future careers, even though I'm still a student. But I learned from my friends that writing and reading are still very important after they graduate, and these skills can be strengthened while we're still on campus, and especially in liberal arts. Well, thank you very much, Guanhua. Last question is innovative education, and it is on actually becoming just one of the things that people want to have on their resume when they seek education abroad.
Deviate from the original intention of innovative education, and are some of the new innovative schools and other kind of elite education.
So Mr. Zhang Jie, Mr. Shen, and Mr. Professor Hatch, on anything? Mr. Zhang, please.
张哲老师。
我抛砖引玉，对，因为我看到有大家可能会关注到一些
I'll get started then. Many of the panelists are with organizations like Innovative Education and students from these on and academies tend to study abroad after graduation. But that's just a part of the students. Many of the students actually choose just to stay in China after they graduate. And one example I can give you is well, just last year, the Chen Xuesen program of Tsinghua University launched a Ling Yi Academy in Shenzhen City. It is a very innovative project which does not prepare you for college and university. Instead, it teaches you the perspectives at broader levels and brings you to the very frontier of the research so that young people have opportunities at the very least to these latest progresses. So this program focuses on discovery of interests rather than where to go abroad or stay in China after graduation. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zhang. We have 2 minutes left, and so one more comment. Any takers?
Wendy.
Or Wendy, Mr. Shen. All right, I can take the question then. Personally, I think innovative education is, on targeting overseas education. That is why many students go abroad after graduation. Well, there are the competition of going abroad right now is so fierce that students with 1,400, 1,500 scores in SAT don't get offers. That's why they have to find a different, way to impress the admission officers. For example, by going to these innovative education programs such as innovative schools. And so I think we need to think about where the destination is for innovative education, and perhaps if the traditional education itself can find a good solution to opportunities for the students, then perhaps innovative education itself can produce more meanings rather than just an option for students from abroad. Thank you very much, Mr. Shen. Thank you. We're approaching the end of the session this morning or this evening. And once again, I'd like to thank all the panelists and the organizers and the panel directors, the audience. Thank you again for your kind support. When we look back on the discussion that we have today about innovative education, we hope these things are not innovation anymore, but rather the norm. We hope more students can benefit from the traditions of the Chinese culture and also increase their competences actually. And any innovative practice comes with unknowns and challenges. And to believe every time the attempt or an experiment is made on education is in order to build better ecosystems of education so that student-centric education in the future can benefit more members of society. We hope that the discussions and sharing of the panelists and experts today really inspired you all. It is a great pleasure for us to share with you all online, and thank you again for coming.